Another deep dive, everyone. This time we're taking on something that you might not think is very exciting, but it can really supercharge your English learning.
That's right. We're talking about note-taking.
Note-taking. But not just any old note-taking. We're going to look at it specifically for those of you out there who are working on, well, becoming fluent and confident in English.
Exactly.
So we're basing this deep dive on a really interesting blog post we found. It lays out a whole 11 note-taking strategies.
Yeah, 11. A lot to cover.
So we're going to try to distill it down a little bit.
Find the gems.
The gems, exactly. Now, the blog starts off by saying that note-taking can, and this is a quote, revolutionize how we learn and use English. So is that just hype, or is there something really to that?
I mean, think about it. When you just read something, especially in another language,
Yeah.
it can be really easy to just kind of glaze over it.
Yeah, totally.
Your eyes are moving, but are you really, processing it?
Right. It's in one ear and out the other, right?
Yeah. But if you're taking notes while you read,
Ah.
it forces you to slow down.
Okay.
And think about what you're actually reading.
So you're actively engaging with the material.
Exactly. You're making choices about what's important,
Okay.
what to write down. And that process, that's what helps the information stick.
It's like you're creating your own little mini study guide as you go.
And it goes even deeper than that. Think about it like when you write something down,
Yeah.
your brain has to process that information in a different way. You're turning it from passive input into active output.
Oh.
And that process helps to build stronger neural connections. So you're actually strengthening your memory.
Wow. So it's not just about remembering the definition of a word, it's about actually understanding how to use it.
Exactly. And the blog post lists a whole bunch of benefits beyond just memory, too.
Okay, like what?
Deeper understanding, a more personalized approach to learning, increased confidence. I mean, it's all connected.
Okay, so we're sold on the why. But let's get to the how. The blog post, as we mentioned, throws out a whole 11 strategies, which can be a little overwhelming.
For sure.
So for someone who's just starting out, wants to kind of dip their toes into this whole note-taking thing, where should they begin? What are some of the most effective and maybe easiest strategies to get started with?
Well, one that's always a winner, especially for things like grammar, is the Cornell Method. It's a classic for a reason.
Oh, okay. The Cornell Method. Tell me more.
So imagine you've got your notebook page,
Uh-huh.
and you divide it into 3 sections. You've got a narrow column on the left,
Okay.
a wider column on the right, and then a space at the bottom.
Okay, I'm picturing it. 3 sections.
Perfect. So let's say you're trying to learn, I don't know, the present perfect tense.
Okay, yeah.
Tricky one, right?
Yeah.
In that left-hand column, you'd write present perfect tense. That's your cue.
My cue. Got it.
And then in that wider section on the right, you start taking notes on the rule itself.
So how to form it.
Yeah, the structure, the have or has, the past participle. And you'd write down some examples.
Okay, so I'm really breaking it down step by step.
And then that bottom section, that's where you summarize everything in your own words. Maybe even create a little quiz for yourself.
Ah, so I'm testing myself to see if I really understand it.
Exactly.
I like it. It's like you're creating your own little mini grammar textbook.
Yeah, exactly. A
Yes,
personalized one that's tailored to your needs. And that's key for any good note-taking strategy.
Okay, personalized. That makes sense.
But
Now, the blog also talked about something that I actually used to do back in the day,
oh, yeah.
a vocabulary journal.
The good old vocabulary journal.
How does that work? And why is it especially helpful for English language learners?
So basically, every time you come across a new word, a word that you don't know,
Huh?
you write it down in your journal.
Got it. But it's more than just writing the definition.
Right. It's about really getting to know the word.
Okay, so how do I do that?
Well, first, write down the definition.
Okay.
But then think about the context where you found it.
Ah.
What was the sentence it was in?
Okay.
What was the overall tone? Maybe even write down a few synonyms or antonyms.
So I'm kind of building a word web around it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the most important part is to use it yourself.
Ah, put it into practice.
Come up with your own sentence, something personal that uses that new word.
So I'm not just memorizing a definition. I'm actually thinking about how I would use it in real life.
That's the key.
Yeah.
Because that's how you make it stick.
Oh, okay. That makes a lot of sense. So we've talked about the Cornell Method, the vocabulary journal. The blog post also mentions mind mapping. Is that something that's actually effective for language learning? I have to admit, I'm a little bit skeptical.
I get it. It sounds a little, out there.
Yeah.
But actually, it can be really helpful, especially for visual learners.
Okay, so for someone like me who likes to see things, likes to draw things out, mind mapping might be a good option.
It could be, because instead of just listing words, you're creating like a visual representation of how they all connect to each other.
Okay, I think I need a concrete example here. What would a mind map for, say, English vocabulary even look like?
All right, so let's say you're working on emotions vocabulary.
Yeah.
Start with a central bubble, right? Emotions in it.
Okay, my center bubble emotions.
Then you branch out from there, maybe with bubbles for happy, sad, angry, different categories.
Okay, got it. Basic categories.
Now, under each of those, you can add more bubbles for specific words.
Okay.
So under happy, you might have joyful, cheerful, elated.
Okay, getting more specific.
You can even add bubbles for idiomatic expressions like over the moon or on cloud nine.
Ah, so I'm not just learning individual words. I'm seeing how they relate to other words, how they fit into different categories.
And you can add colors, images, little doodles, whatever helps you remember.
So it's engaging that visual part of my brain.
Right. And because you're creating this visual map, you're more likely to remember the information.
Okay, so mind mapping, I'm starting to see the appeal. But how do I make sure I'm not just like memorizing words in isolation? How do I know I'm actually learning how to use them correctly?
Well, you can take it a step further by adding examples to your mind map.
Ah, okay.
So under elated, you could write, she was elated when she received the good news.
Okay, so I'm seeing the word in action.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, speaking of visual learning, the blog post mentions another strategy that I have to admit sounds a little bit unconventional.
Oh, yeah. Which one?
Doodling. Doodling in my notes.
Doodling.
Is that something we should be encouraging, or is that just a distraction?
There's actually a lot of research that shows that doodling can actually help us learn and remember information better.
Really? Even for something as, complex as language?
Especially for complex concepts.
Okay, explain this to me. I'm not quite there yet.
Well, think about it this way. When you doodle, you're using a different part of your brain, the creative part. And when you engage that part of your brain, it can actually help to make the information more memorable.
So it's like I'm making those connections in a different way.
Exactly. It's not just about logic and reason. It's about tapping into that visual and creative side as well.
Okay.
And this can be especially helpful for things like idioms, which can be really tricky for English language learners.
Okay. Yeah, idioms are tough. They don't always translate literally.
Right. So if you can create a little doodle that represents the idiom, it can help you to remember the meaning.
Give me an example.
Okay, let's take the idiom, kick the bucket,
All right, kick the bucket.
which means, to die.
Yeah, to die.
Now, imagine you're taking notes on idioms. You come across kick the bucket.
Yeah.
You could draw a little stick figure literally kicking a bucket.
Okay.
Sounds silly, but that image is going to stick in your mind.
It's a visual reminder.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the next time you see or hear that idiom, you'll remember the doodle and you'll remember the meaning.
Okay, so it's not about being a great artist. It's about just creating those visual cues.
Exactly. It's about making the learning process more engaging and fun,
Yeah.
and ultimately more effective.
I like it. I like it. Now, let's move on to a strategy that I think a lot of our listeners are probably already familiar with, taking notes while actively listening. The blog post talks about how this can be a real game changer, especially when you're watching English videos or listening to podcasts, things like that.
It's such a valuable skill.
It is. But how do you do it effectively? What are some tips for really making the most of active listening and note-taking?
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We talked about the Cornell Method, vocabulary journals, mind mapping, even doodling.
It's a lot.
But I think it's important to remember that note-taking isn't just about the mechanics.
Right. It's not just about following a formula.
It's about, I feel like there's a deeper connection between note-taking and our emotional journey as language learners.
Definitely.
So how does note-taking tie into all of that? Well, every time you write something down in your notebook, in your vocabulary journal, whatever it is,
Yeah.
you're not just, adding to a list. You're actually creating a record of your progress.
Oh.
It's something you can look back on and see how far you've come.
So it's like a visual reminder that I'm actually making progress even when it doesn't feel like it.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And that can be so motivating. Language learning can be tough. There are going to be times when you feel stuck.
Oh, yeah.
But if you can look back and see all the work you've put in,
Yeah.
all the new words you've learned,
Yeah.
it can give you that boost to keep going.
It's like, oh, wow, I actually do know more than I thought I did.
Exactly.
And it's not just about tracking progress either, right?
Yeah.
It's about making that connection, making the learning process more personal.
Totally. So let's say you're using the Cornell method,
Yeah.
right? You've got your notes, your summaries, all that. But then in that bottom section
Yeah.
where you're kind of putting everything together,
Right.
you also write down some of your own thoughts. How does this connect to my life? What questions do I have?
So I'm not just taking notes on the material, I'm taking notes on my own learning process.
Exactly. And that makes it way more engaging because you're making it your own.
It's not just about memorizing facts, it's about like integrating the language into my life.
That's it. And when you start doing that, when you start making those connections, the language becomes so much more meaningful.
I love that.
Yeah.
So note-taking, it's not just a tool for learning English, it's a tool for self-discovery.
I like that. Yeah. It's about figuring out how you learn best, what works for you.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the big takeaway here is that note-taking is a powerful tool.
Absolutely.
But it's up to each of us to find the way to use it that works best for us.
To make it our own.
To make it our own, exactly.
Yeah.
So experiment, have fun with it, and who knows, you might just surprise yourself with what you discover along the way.
On that note, happy note-taking, everyone.